Many people have the mistaken impression that what the Buddha was teaching was a system of ethics, a way to live ethically in the world, some sort of spiritual form of human governance. But this is mistaken. And the problem is, if one holds this view, then it leads to all kinds of unwanted consequences. For example, the belief that the Buddha was an elitist who taught a system of theocratic hierarchy. The reality is that the Buddha taught the view of equality. Famously, the Buddha said, "Caste is not the most important thing. Race is not the most important thing. The most important thing is the training." And so, those with the highest level of spiritual accomplishment deserve the greatest respect. Now, I'd better give you an example to explain how we come to mistaken ideas about the Buddha's teachings if we think that basically the Buddha was trying to teach us a way to live ethically in the world. Now, you may or may not be aware that at the time of the Buddha, then his followers lived in communities. They were monastic communities. Now, the Buddha didn't make rules as such, but as needs arose, then the Buddha gave instructions, prescriptions for the way we need to conduct ourselves. And for example, the monks and the nuns had to beg for their food. They weren't allowed to gather their own food or even to store up food for consumption later. And they were also not allowed to buy their own food or cook their own food. So instead, what they had to do was they had to rely on the villagers. They would go into the villages in the morning, beg for food, bring that home and eat that, and they would only eat one meal a day. Now, part of the reason why the mendicants didn't engage in these normal worldly activities of gathering food and cooking food is because in order to do that, you have to engage in a lot of non-virtue. For example, you need to slaughter animals in order to get meat to eat. And so, if we think that the Buddha was teaching a system of ethics, a way to live ethically in the world, and as a consequence of that, the conclusion that we might get to is that the Buddha expected the lay people to do the dirty work for his mendicants. The lay people domesticated animals and slaughtered them for their meat. They also had to plow the fields, and in plowing the fields, then you killed many insects, and is something that leads to future rebirth in unsatisfactory realms. So the question is, why did the Buddha expect the lay people to do this for the sake of the mendicants? For example, a mendicant is not allowed to destroy a seed of a plant, something that could be planted and cultivated and provide food for others. So if they are given nuts or seeds, these either have to be toasted or crushed by a layperson before they're given to the mendicant. Now, this misunderstanding comes from a fundamental misinterpretation of the Buddha's teachings. Basically, the Buddha was teaching that there's no hope for the mundane world. There's nothing you can do to improve it. As long as you're born in samsara, then you're going to experience suffering. And also, you're going to be complicit in the suffering of others. You've almost got no choice except to engage in negative acts. The problem is, most people don't want to give up on the world. In fact, most of us are perfectly happy to live within the mundane world as long as we get some short-term rewards. And so why are the mendicants special in this regard? Why is it that the Buddha taught the mendicants should not engage in these non-virtues? And that is because there is a basic prerequisite to becoming a mendicant. And that is, one needs to develop renunciation. Renunciation is this belief that samsara is nothing but suffering. The way it's taught in the texts is that samsara, this mundane world, is likened to a pit of fire or a nest of poisonous vipers. So as you can see, samsara is taught to be nothing but trouble. Now, once one realizes that as long as one is born in the mundane world, one is bound to suffer, then the next thought that should arise is this wish for liberation, this wish to be emancipated from the mundane world, or to achieve what is called nirvana. And so a mendicant is someone who first has identified that samsara sucks, it's no good, there's no way to fix it, there's no hope, and then secondly, develops this wish to escape samsara, or to achieve liberation. And so what the Buddha taught was the methods to escape samsara, the methods to achieve awakening. And if you've made that sincere pledge to be free from the mundane world, then you have to do everything you can to avoid even the slightest negativity. And on top of that, you have to apply yourself continuously to virtue. And so mendicants spend all their time in religious practice or spiritual practice. They study, contemplate, and meditate. They don't engage in worldly activities that necessitate non-virtuous actions. Through the accumulation of vast stores of positive merit and purification of all of one's previous negative karma, one is eventually able to achieve what is called liberation, or the state of an arahat. It is not the case that this is the only way to achieve liberation. In fact, there are taught to be 84,000 different types of methods for achieving liberation. And the reason why there are taught to be 84,000 different types of methods is because there are 84,000 different types of obstacles to liberation. And those are associated with one's own negative emotional content, what are called the kleshas in the Buddha Dharma. And in fact, there are practices for lay people as well. But the truth is that these lay practices, the practices of Vajrayana yogis, are no easier than the practices of a mendicant. In fact, one could say that the practice of a mendicant is far easier than the practice of a Vajrayana yogi. But this is an extremely difficult topic, and not one that can be covered in a short time. In general, what we do is we see monastic practices to be the most difficult. And then we see the practices that are associated with the Vajrayana to be the easiest. Because in those, there's no talk about giving up on those things that we like in this world. For example, you don't have to give up on a sexual partner. You don't have to give up on alcohol. And so on the outside, to us, it seems easier. But in fact, it is much more difficult. And you only have to look at the life story of a true yogi, for example, Milarepa, to see why that is the case. In order to give up your worldly work and join a religious community, one doesn't have to go through extreme hardships, like Milarepa did. In fact, the principal vows of not killing, not stealing, not telling spiritual lies, and not engaging in sexual misconduct are quite easy to keep. But for most of us, to engage in extreme ascetic practice as Milarepa did is almost impossible. For example, would you be able to sit in a cave in the snow and not eat for months and practice the Dharma? Well, most of us couldn't do that. In fact, what would happen is we'd either go crazy or die, or we'd give up before we ever got to the end of our journey. Anyway, I'm going to give you a real-life example of somebody who had this view that what the Buddha taught was a system of ethics, a way of living in the world. What you have to understand is, he didn't hold this view because he was stupid or naive. In fact, he was highly intelligent. He spent 6 years in a Thai forest community, studying the Buddha Dharma and memorizing the scriptures. In the end, he gave up because he believed that the Buddha's methods would never be a long-term solution for human problems. His belief was that the Buddhist method depended on a mercantile class that was able to patronize the Sangha, or the mendicants. So what you can gather by what he said was that the Buddha was teaching a system of ethics, a way of dealing with the world. Not only that, but also that this system was somehow now outdated. So what was his conclusion? Well, his next step was to move to an organic farm in Norway. So here you can see that he was principally considering human impact on the environment. Just because we are living in a way that is less harmful to the planet doesn't mean that our system of governance will survive. What the Buddha taught was that we need to escape from the world. Everybody needs to escape from the world, and eventually everyone will come to this conclusion. But the Buddha was also well aware that most people aren't interested in transcendence. As I said in the beginning of this video, for most of us, we're willing to tolerate the mundane world, as long as we get some short-term rewards. What the Buddha taught was that lifetime after lifetime we circle endlessly in samsara. And because of that, the only escape is to go beyond the mundane world. But for many of us, we don't believe that there are past and future lives, and we don't understand the means by which karma can dictate how the world appears to us. So anyway, what happens is people judge the spiritual path based on their own personal preconceptions. For somebody who sees environmental issues to be the primary consideration, then they judge the spiritual path in the light of that preconception. And it's the same when it comes to those who place their faith primarily in scientific discovery. Their natural prejudice colors the way that they interpret the world. The Buddha taught the means to transcendence, the way of escaping the world, and also the Buddha taught the truth of karma, cause and effect. And so, if someone came to the Buddha asking how they could be happy in the world, then the Buddha would say, well, you have to apply yourself to virtue. For example, if you want wealth, then you should practice generosity. If you want long life, then you should free the lives of other animals that are destined for slaughter. This sort of thing. And it's not like the Buddha would only teach Buddhists, or was only interested in those who were seeking liberation. The Buddha taught in accordance with those who sought his advice. There once was a woman whose only son had died. She had heard that the Buddha was residing near her village, and that he had special spiritual powers. And so she approached the Buddha and asked him to bring back her son from the dead. The Buddha responded and said, well, of course, I'll do this. But first, you must get for me a mustard seed from a household that has never known death. The woman was overjoyed. She thought, how simple. If I can just return with a mustard seed, then I can have my son back. And after searching relentlessly throughout the day, then by evening time she had realized that she was not the only one who had experienced death. That in fact, everyone, whoever it is destined to pass from this world. And on the basis of this, then the woman developed renunciation. And having developed renunciation, then she became a nun. And it's taught that she achieved the state of arhatship. A Buddha, a transcendent conqueror, is a beacon for sentient beings. Through their guidance and by teaching the Dharma, they are able to transform our outlook on the world. And it is my sincere wish that you should enter the path and thereby progress swiftly. And from my own side, I'm willing to do whatever I can to help you in some small way along your journey to final liberation and freedom from suffering in the mundane world. So until next time, and see you later.